You're listening to the Platform Launchers podcast. I'm John Stange, and it's great to have you with us this week. As always, here we talk about building, growing, and monetizing your online platform. We also talk about taking your passion, turning it into a platform, and letting that become your paycheck. And it's a really fun process. And each week, right before I record this podcast and share it via your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, one of the things I have the privilege to do is interact with our members club. And so at this point now, we've got every section of the United States represented in the group. And it's so fun to see who joins our live calls each week and be encouraged and inspired by some of the things that we're working on. And there's a variety of things that we like to talk about as a group because we're trying to propel each other forward. And one of the things that we were recently talking about is social media. And that's obviously something that any of us as platform developers, this is something that we'll all be thinking about and using to one degree or another. Most of us will be. And that's what we're going to spend some time talking about this week. We're going to be talking not just about social media in general, but also some best practices and the voice and tone that we choose to take when creating social media content, because social media is very useful. It's a useful tool in many ways. When I first started using it, I think I used it like most people did. My primary goal was to use it to stay connected with some friends and some family that I hadn't seen very often. And then, you know how that goes over time. Your social media contacts start expanding and you begin sharing other things. And so I remember in addition to just connecting with friends and family, I'd also use it sometimes to share about some of the projects I was working on. But I would say, in general, when it comes to social media, my initial philosophy continues to be my present day philosophy, where I tend to keep my content light and relational. But not long after I started using social media, and again, I'm talking about in its early days. So I'm talking 15 plus years ago, not too long after I started using it, I actually noticed two trends, and they were very visible trends, but two very visible, noticeable trends in social media that both irritated me. And by the way, they still do. One I see a little bit less, one I still see all the time. And the two trends I noticed, and maybe you noticed these things too, was people posting duck-faced selfies every day. So I'm not even going to impersonate that because I know this gets broadcasted on YouTube and I don't want there to be visual evidence of me creating a duck-faced selfie. So I don't do that. But I remember for a time, everybody was doing that. And I thought, why is this a trend? This is one of the weirdest trends I've ever seen. And yet that became a thing. And by the way, prior to that time, I'd never even heard of the term selfie. And then someone started using that term, and now we just all understand what it is. So that was one thing that kind of bugged me a little bit. And then another thing that I wasn't too fond of was the fact that there were others who were not only posting political content, but they were constantly and only posting political content. And I remember thinking, this is not a great way to use social media. And the truth is, there's still people who use their social media that way. And what kind of response, when you see that happening, what kind of response do you tend to notice that they get? What I notice is that they get very little response at all. That and some of them get nothing, because what ends up happening is people get sick of seeing that sort of content. And so they either mute or unfriend the people that are posting it continually, which means nobody's seeing what they're posting. And as a result, they have very little influence. So if that's something you've noticed, if that's something that's bothered you, keep that in the back of your mind. But now, what do you do if you want to communicate things that you're passionate about on social media and you're not sure how that content is going to land? Should you avoid sharing your passions just because you think maybe your opinions might irritate others? I know sometimes, I wonder that before I post certain things. I think, if I post that, someone's going to get irritated with that. Should I hold back from doing that? Should you hold back from doing that if you're genuinely wanting to share your passions with other people? I don't think you should hold back. But what I want to do is just share an approach that I have learned to enjoy taking that actually seems effective. And it's all related to the tone and the voice that I choose to use when I'm on social media. And here's my philosophy. And if this is useful for you, I certainly hope it's useful for you. But if it's useful for you, please take this and use it to the fullest extent. But I like to view social media like a dinner party that everyone is invited to. That's how I refer to it in my mind. It's just like a dinner party. Everyone's invited to this dinner party. And whatever I post, if I post something, I consider it to be an invitation to interact. So if we're connected on social media and I post something, I love interacting with people. And so I look into the comments. I love responding to the comments. I liking the comments, interacting all different ways. I love joking about lighthearted things. I also like sharing about important subjects, but when I do so, I try to use a respectful tone because I don't want people to ignore some of those subjects. When I'm posting things on social media, as I'm sharing things to what I'm calling this dinner party, I don't like arguing. I also don't like pointless negativity. So you'll notice if you ever kind of peruse my personal social media that I typically don't interact with people who behave in an argumentative or a negative way. I usually just let their comments stand there, but I don't really interact with it because that's not how I like to use social media. And ironically, and maybe you can identify with this because I know some of us are probably in the same boat, but I'm connected with a few people who only ever seem to interact with what I post online if they have something negative to say about it. That's the only time they ever interact. It's never if they have something positive or encouraging to say. It's only when they have something critical to say. And other than that, it's like they don't even exist. And recently I was thinking, I might need to do a connection purge sometime soon to see if I could clean that up a little bit. I've actually been debating that. I don't really like to disconnect from people, but I don't like pointless negativity. So that is my conundrum. But generally speaking, there's 7 ways that I like to use my social media, or 7 things that I do when I'm posting things on social media that I'm trying to accomplish. Maybe I should say it that way. And number 1 on my list is this: I like to encourage and edify the reader. Someone sees something that I post on social media, I want them to be encouraged and I want them to be edified. That's a high goal of what I post, even if it's just to be lighthearted and share a little something interesting or fun from my day. I like to do that hoping that it might be encouraging or edifying to somebody that would read it. Number 2 on my list is this: I like to build relationships. That's why I interact in the comments. So if somebody comments on something that I post, I usually give it some form of interaction. Again, unless it's negative. If it's negative, it's just my preference not to really interact with that. A third way I like to use social media is to just be entertaining. And again, I think in life, I know certainly in my life, there are plenty of things that I have to deal with on a regular basis that are kind of hard things, sometimes even emotionally difficult things to process. And I think, I'm probably not the only person dealing with things like this. And so I try and be a bit entertaining with some of the content that I'm posting. A fourth thing that I like to do on my social media is to share about things that are my deeper level core beliefs. So some of those involve sharing my personal faith. Some of those involve sharing just some of my opinions about things that I would consider, just like deeper subjects to talk about. And so I like sharing those things from time to time. It's not the only thing I share on my social media, but I don't skip sharing that because those things matter to me. And I do consider it important to share those things. So I make a point to do so. A fifth way that I use social media is to let people know what's going on with my family. Back in the day, a lot of us used to send out cards at the end of the year that maybe had a kind of an update on what was going on in our family life. Well, now social media allows us to do that. And so I like to let people know what's going on with our family, and I'll use social media for that. Number 6 on my list is this: sometimes I like to just share things because I think it's helpful information to share. So if I find out something that I think would be useful for somebody else, sometimes I'll just post it on my social media and say, I don't know who else this can benefit, but it was helpful to me. And so I'm sharing it with you. So sometimes that'll involve sharing some financial information. Or I remember at one point when rates went really low on mortgages years ago and we refinanced our mortgage, I shared where I got a low rate on a mortgage, which seems like a really boring way to use social media, except for the fact that the people that found that helpful thought, yeah, that will be immensely helpful to me in my personal financial spot. And so it was great. I got to interact with people that way, share some helpful information. Earlier today, I shared just an interesting fact about the sun and the moon and something that I'd read from something scientific. And I just thought, oh, that's kind of interesting and helpful information to share. And so I shared it on my social media. But then number 7 on my list is this, and this is one of my favorite ways to use social media, and that's to lift someone else up or highlight the work they're doing. So it's basically to just kind of use your social media to acknowledge someone else in your life. So it could be your spouse, your kids, a good friend, someone that you're acquainted with in some other way, and just let people know about the cool thing they're doing or their new book or their new service or whatever it may be. I really enjoy doing that. I think that that's a very positive way to use social media. But let's look at the reverse of that, because not everybody chooses to use their social media that way. Some people, I think, miss a wonderful opportunity to have an influence and an impact when it comes to social media. And let me give you 6 things that I don't like when I see people do this online. And maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't agree. But number 1 on my list of things I don't like that I think actually minimizes or mutes a person's influence online. I don't like when I see people using their social media to complain or criticize. Some people do that almost exclusively. They just complain or criticize. And so anytime you interact with anything they post online, it just brings you down just a little bit. And you look at it and you think, boy, this person rarely has something uplifting to say. So I don't really like when people use their social media to complain or criticize. Number 2 is I don't like when people use their social media to rant about politics. Now, here's the thing. I actually think politics is important. And I'm one of those people that votes in every election. And I actually deeply care about political subjects and opinions, and I think things have a historical context in which they're happening in, and I pay attention to all that stuff. But I don't think it's useful to rant about politics on social media, because usually people that do that, that's all they end up talking about. And they start to act like they think politics is the deeper solution for what ails this world. And it's not. Politics is important, but there are deeper things that go much deeper than our personal politics. And it ends up muting your influence if you rant about politics too much. Number 3 on my list of I don't like is when people post the same thing nearly every day. Even if it's something you would say is relatively good, when somebody posts the same thing every single day, after a while it gets old and you stop paying attention to what they're posting. Number 4 on my I don't like list is when people draw unhealthy forms of attention toward themselves through their social media. So sometimes I'll see people maybe dress inappropriately or provocatively because they hope to get some form of attention from that. And I look at that and I think that's unhealthy. That's an unhealthy form of attention. Sometimes I've seen people do things that are physically risky and dangerous to their own life, whether it be driving too fast or doing something that is just kind of a treacherous activity. And I look at that and I think you're just trying to draw unhealthy forms of attention toward yourself, and you're using your social media to do that. I don't like when people do that. Number 5 on my I don't like list is this: sell things. Now, I think social media is a great place to give things away, but I don't like when people get on social media and they're always trying to sell me something. And maybe you feel that way as well. I think that if you give things away for free, that gives people the opportunity to see what else you offer, and that will eventually connect them to things that you may sell. But I don't think directly selling on social media is typically a good idea. Certainly not a good idea if you do it too much. And so I'm not a fan of that. So I'd recommend you use your social media to give things, not sell things. And number 6, I don't like when people share content that I would consider profane or inappropriate. Some people that doesn't bother, but I'm one of those people that I look at that and I think, again, when I'm accessing social media, I want it to be something that's uplifting and encouraging. I don't want it to be something that I look at and say, no, that really drags myself, my life, my mind in a unhealthy direction. Don't want to go in that direction. So I don't really like when people post things that I would say are profane and inappropriate. You may agree with my list, you may disagree with my list, but that's kind of where I'm at with these things. And here's the thing: it's perfectly fine if you disagree with my list of do's or my list of don'ts. I'm just expressing my preferences here, although I'm convinced I'm not the only one who feels this way. And in most of these areas, I'm pretty convinced that many people would say that these would be considered social media best practices. These are the type of things that most people feel pretty much the same about. But how does this relate to you if you're trying to build an online platform? What role should social media play in your online presence? This is something our members club has been talking about at length over the course of the past week. What role should social media play as we try to build our online platforms? Well, I think social media can give your content a very nice boost. And I think it can help build awareness of what you're doing, but there should always be something more permanent that your social media is pointing people toward, because social media platforms are really just rented spaces that you don't own. And since you don't own it, it's not wise to make those social media platforms foundational when it comes to what you're building. Treat your social media like a beneficial option, but not the end in and of itself. And I could testify to the fact that I know people who spend more time on their social media than they do on their own platform or on their own website. And so instead of creating content that's going to stick around, so like blog posts or courses or videos that they could package into training products, they spend a lot of their time, and time is that one resource you don't get back, right? We only have limited time. And I see people spending all their time, they're just crafting and creating social media content that might be fine, but it doesn't fully connect to their deeper level content. And it doesn't seem to connect people to products and services that they offer for sale. And so when I see that happen, it seems like things get out of balance then. And in instances like that, I tend to think social media is actually, for some of those people, serving as a distraction and not a benefit. So what's the balance? What does a balanced way of using social media look like? And if you're looking to promote something, if you're not going to solely rely on social media, which I'm encouraging you not to solely rely really on anything, social media being one of the things to not solely rely on. But if you have something to promote, how should you do it? And I have to tell you, I'm just going to walk you through how I promote something if I have something to promote. And I hope you'll find something here useful. I do use social media, but I don't use it exclusively. If I have something to promote, this is how I like to spread the word. I start by sharing about it in my podcasts. Then I share about it on my blog. And by the way, the good news about the blog is that my blogs, that content gets permanently indexed in search engines. So unlike social media, those blog posts, they stick around. People find them years after the fact. I share free content related to whatever I'm promoting via my social media channels. So I give people free samples, free content, free downloads, free whatever on my social media channels. So I do make social media part of my promotional strategy. It's just not the whole thing. Then I also make myself a guest on various podcasts. Then I love to create brief videos for YouTube that help solve related problems. And then I like to link to my solution in the description of those YouTube videos. And then, and this is probably the biggest of them all, I send a message to my email list, and I often will include a coupon or some sort of discount code that incentivizes people to utilize whatever product or service I've created. And that combination of things helps me promote things in a way that I don't think if I only relied on one of those that I'd be able to fully promote. But I will tell you that if I had to only rely on one thing, it wouldn't be social media. It would be my email list. If you build an email list, that can be a very powerful marketing tool. But I prefer to do that whole mix: podcasts, blog, social media, being a guest on other people's shows, YouTube content, my email list, all of those things. This, in my opinion, is a more balanced and more effective approach than relying on social media alone. And getting back to the idea of tone, I think this also helps me keep the tone of my social media more on the relational side of things instead of being overly promotional, which again, I think can turn people away. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we wrap things up, and it's kind of a personal testimony of how social media has benefited one particular area of my promotional strategy or my content strategy. I attribute much of the success of what I'm doing in the online space with things like podcasts, books, speaking, coaching, etc., to the help of friends who heard about what I was doing through social media. But I think they were more willing to help get word out because my promotional posts were only a small minority of what I was typically posting. And the major example that goes along with that is podcasting. When I started creating podcasts, I remember at the time, 2015 and 2016 is really when I got going with those things. And it seems crazy, but at that point, a lot of people were still unfamiliar with podcasting. And so I would, from time to time, explain via social media what podcasts were and how to listen to them. And many of my friends started listening to my shows, and then they would share links to those shows with others. And it was really cool because it seemed like they were happy to promote what I was doing because I wasn't trying to sell them something. And so now it's years later, and it's years after I started my shows. The downloads at this point number in the millions, which I'm grateful for. But when I get back to how that train got going, I'm convinced that friends I stayed connected with via social media, they were the ones that got that train going. They were the initial listeners. They were the people that helped me refine what I was doing, and they generously shared about it via their social media in a relational way to other people. And it showed how relationship building through social media was a really good content promotion strategy, you could say, because people appreciated what I was creating on the helpful side and the fact that I was giving it away for free and that I made it easily shareable online. So as I'm sharing all of this, I just want to reiterate one more time, this is just one man's perspective. This is just my perspective because I know that there are many different ways to utilize social media that can be effective. This has been effective for me, but there are other ways to do this. And I know other people that have other approaches as well. So I'm not trying to exclude other philosophies, but I wanted to give you a good overview of my personal philosophy and how I'm personally using social media. And if your approach to social media is different from mine, that is completely okay. I just want you to do what ethically works for you. And in the meantime, I wanted to be honest with you about my opinions and truthfully what's had good effect on my journey of platform development. Because these are things, this list of not relying on any one particular thing, and then this idea of the do's and don'ts of how to use social media, I think it's helped me immensely. And I hope that it helps. If you're listening, I hope it helps you. If you're watching right now via YouTube, I hope it helps you as well. And here's the thing, I'd love to hear what's working for you as well, because maybe you'll have an idea that I could utilize that'll be beneficial to me. And if that's the case, send me an email. My email address is john@platformlaunchers.com. I'd love to hear from you that way. Or again, if you're watching from YouTube, just leave some ideas in the comments. I'd love to just learn and hear some of the ideas that are working for you. And before we sign off for this week, I just want to invite you to stop over to platformlaunchers.com. Lots of useful stuff for you over there. You could take a free preview of our membership community, the Members Club. And you could look through, we've got hundreds and hundreds of hours now of video training content and course content that'll help you build, grow, and monetize your online platform. You can find it all over there. Just take the free 2-week test drive. There's no obligation if you take it. You could quit at any time if it's not the right fit for you, but check that out at platformlaunchers.com. And we'd love to meet you in the process if that's something that you're able to utilize. And we also, and I mention this from time to time, we have a free 21-day platform development planning guide right on the homepage of platformlaunchers.com that if you download it, it will definitely help you succinctly figure out how to build, grow, and monetize your online platform. It helps you discover your message, deliver your content, derive your income. The plan is right there, and it'll help you over the course of the next 3 weeks really get your ideas down on paper. But that's it for us this week. Thanks so much for being part of this week's podcast and this week's video for YouTube. We're just so grateful to be able to spend this time with you, and we look forward to catching up with you again right here very soon. Take care.